This is the engineer. Real name Dale Conager. Job area denial. This time it's gonna be the complete history of the engineer. So far. For a character who has very rarely shown up in the TF Comics series, he's actually very important to the storyline of the game. But we'll get to that in a bit. As always, we're gonna start before the beginning. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of concept art available of the engineer, and most of what we do have is very easily recognizable as the same character we have today. Except for this one, where he has a thin mustache and glasses instead of goggles, and very different looking overalls. In the first trailer, the engineer has a much paler shirt, armbands for his class emblems, and a team-colored glove. But overall, engineer has pretty much kept his original construction worker look from the beginning. The engineer is primarily voiced by Grant Goodeve, though Nolan North did voice him just for Expiration Date. Unlike most of the main TF2 voice actors, Goodeve has mainly done live-action work. He played David Bradford in a 70s comedy drama called 8 is Enough, which I guess was pretty popular back in the day. He actually took over that role from Mark Hamill, who played it in the pilot, so fun fact. And he also voiced Wolf in Star Fox Assault and appeared on Family Feud a few times.
Ice cream?
Why not?
Why not?
Sounds like a goodie.
Ice cream!
Cream gravy.
The engineer's last name actually comes from a novel called Conager, written by Louis L'Amour, who Valve writers Eric Wolpaw and Jay Pinkerton are both fans of. The engineer's grandfather's first name, Radigan, also comes from another L'Amour book called Radigan. And speaking of Radigan Conager, he's actually one of the most important characters in the entire TF2 story. A whole mini episode could have been done on him, but you know what? I'll give you the 2-for-1 Conager special this time, okay? Merry Christmas. This is Radigan Conager. Real name, Radigan Conager. Job, inventor and owner of Conager's Tool and Munitions. In 1890, Blutarch Man hires him to build a life-extending machine so he can outlive his brother. When Radigan returns to his workshop, a woman who just so happens to look an awful lot like the administrator offers him her entire supply of Australium to build the exact same machine for Redmond Man. He of course does build both devices, and this extends the Gravel Wars another 80 years, which includes the main events of TF2. After being exposed to the Australium, Radigan became far more muscular, grew a mustache, can be seen drinking beer, and has chest hair in the shape of Texas. In what are most likely a collection of Radigan's notes, we can see that he seemed to have an interest in developing a device that could have saved Abraham Lincoln from assassination. He also has a picture of the robot scouts thought to have been developed by Gray Man. When Radigan dies, he has his blueprints buried with him, and those blueprints reveal that he built a third life-extending machine. But for who? I don't know. There's still a lot of mystery around Radigan Conager, and even though we haven't heard much about him since the engineer update, I feel like he'll at least be mentioned again in future comics. Considering Dell has the same last name as his grandfather, it most likely means that Radigan had a son. In Radigan's notes, we see a picture of the Team Fortress Classic team. We also see a much newer looking picture of the TFC engineer giving a young Dell Conager a pair of goggles. It's never outright stated, but it would appear that the TFC engineer is probably the TF2 engineer's father. The Team Fortress Classic engineer, whose name is Fred, and the rest of the TFC team return to the TF Comics where they're hired by Gray Man to hunt down the administrator. But so far, Fred and Dell have not interacted at any point in the comics. There aren't really any major hints to the age of the TF2 engineer. We know that Fred and the TFC team were working for the Mann brothers in 1930, and the engineer is a kid when he's given those goggles in that picture. It's completely possible, and maybe even more likely, that that picture wasn't actually taken in 1930. But if it was, and Dell was, I don't know, let's say 10, that'd make him around 48 during the main events of the game and around 52 during Man vs. Machine in the comics. Though, to me, that seems kinda old. I don't really think he looks older than maybe his early 40s, but who knows. We also know that the engineer has 11 hard science PhDs, and that would probably take a normal person a long time to get, but engineer is also very intelligent, so he could have possibly earned them faster. But that does make both engineer and Heavy probably more of a real doctor than Medic ever was. We can see blueprints for the modern sentry gun in Radigan's workshop in 1890, but as far as we know, it was never actually built until the 1960s. According to the wiki, the TF2 engineer developed the TF2 Sentry in 1965 while under contract with TF Industries. The year 1965 apparently comes from the Sentry operating manual, and I've looked over that pretty extensively and can't seem to find that year mentioned anywhere, so I might be missing it. But considering how often it appears on the TF2 wiki, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on this one. In the loose cannon comic, the engineer is brought in by Blutarch Man to fix his malfunctioning life-extending machine. In order to do so, Blutarch gives the engineer blueprints that were buried with his grandfather. In those blueprints, he also finds instructions for the Frontier Justice, the Wrangler, and the Gunslinger, which were all originally developed by Radigan. And Engineer appears to have removed his own right hand in order to use the Gunslinger. It's kind of unclear in the actual game whether he just removes his glove and there's a robo hand underneath, or he reattaches his regular hand anytime he wants to use it. In the TF comics, he's seen gloveless and with two regular hands. But you could see a ring around his right arm where the gunslinger would have cut off. That's a nice little detail, I like that. So he probably has some kind of skin-like material covering the robo-hand, or maybe he does actually reattach his old one, though that seems a little bit less likely. The TF2 mercenaries are pretty consistently regarded as rejects, as Saxton Hale describes them exceptionally subnormal. But the engineer doesn't really seem to fit in with that label. He's probably one of the smartest characters that we know of in the TF2 universe. I mean, sure, he kills people for a living, but he's not exactly crazy, and he's otherwise a normal-ish dude. We learn in the comic Blood in the Water that the engineer has been building life-extending machines for the administrator. And if I had to guess, that's probably why he works for Red and Blue, so that the administrator can keep him close at all times. The engineer also appears to be one of the only mercenaries to actually be friendly towards Pyro. In the True Meaning comic, he reads Pyro the story of Australian Christmas, and appears to understand Pyro when it attempts to speak. The engineer also works on experiments with Medic in both Expiration Date and the comic Gargoyles and Gravel. And okay, now it's time for a timeline of the major events involving the Conager family that we know of. In 1890, Blutarch Man hires Radigan Conager to build him a life-extending machine. A mysterious woman convinces him to build a second one for Redmond Man. After being exposed to Australium, Radigan develops some super high-tech stuff for the time, including the Wrangler and the Gunslinger. At some point, he dies and has all of his blueprints buried with him. In 1930, an engineer named Fred is hired by Red and Blue to fight the Gravel Wars. This is likely the son of Radigan and the father of the TF2 engineer. At some point, Del Conager is born in Bee Cave, Texas. The engineer spends 10 years working as a roughneck in the West Texas oil fields. He also manages to earn 11 hard science PhDs. In 1965, engineer apparently develops a sentry gun and his other buildings while under contract with TF Industries. Around 1968, the engineer, along with 8 other mercenaries, are hired by Red and Blue to fight over land in New Mexico, presumably replacing Fred and the other TFC mercenaries. When Blutarch's life-extending machine is failing, the engineer is called in to fix it. Engineer fixes the machine and rebuilds weapons that Radigan previously designed. At some point around Christmas time, a rocket crash lands into a building that the engineer and the Pyro are in. Inside the rocket, they find space weapons from another dimension. In 1971, the medic and the engineer discover that the mercenaries may be getting tumors as a result of teleportation. Turns out, it just mutates bread. Later in 1971, Redmond and Blutarch Man are killed by Grey Man, leaving engineer and the rest of the team out of a job. They are immediately rehired by Saxon Hale to defend Manco. In 1972, Grey Man takes control of Manco when the team disbands. Fred and the rest of the TFC team are hired to hunt down the administrator and the TF2 mercenaries. The engineer goes into hiding with the administrator. He upgrades and repairs the life-extending machine that she's been using. And, that's kind of it. A lot of the engineer's role in the comics is more behind the scenes, and while we do know an okay amount of what the engineer did before he became a mercenary, there aren't really many specific dates. So a timeline is a little bit difficult to piece together. But that was the complete history of the engineer so far. Who do you want to see next? If we're gonna go by the classes, it's gonna be Soldier, Demoman, Pyro, or Spy. So let me know. But until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side, dude meisters.